Okay, so here goes. I've been trying to put together these notes and everything, and I keep making more notes, so I figured instead of writing everything down and making it mundane to go through, it'd be easier to just show you, because otherwise explaining the specific details kind of takes a long time. So we've got this setup here that we had before. So when you're just starting, we're going to go through just the basic steps first. So the very first thing that you want to do, obviously, is get the thing that you want to copy. So we got our Chewy here. Look at the way that you want to be able to do it. This one specifically, I use dowels. I think they were, I want to say 3/8 inch dowels. I'm not sure. But basically I plugged up the ends with the dowels because I didn't want to have the hole in the middle. I wanted it to come out to be more like a little bit more durable this way rather than bending as much. But that's going to be something that you're going to be able to decide based on Eddie and what he would like. The only thing would be is if you want to keep the holes in here, is how to set that up so that you can create the mold in half so that basically you can still have those holes. You're going to want to sustain these little plugs with something on the sides so that you can pour it and have them in the exact spot. And that's a little tricky just depending on how you set up the mold. But the product that I'd recommend for you, I don't think it'll be an issue with that type of stuff. I think it'll still be just slightly more spongy than this is. So it might be just perfect without the holes, from what I understand. So the very first thing you want to do is obviously just take a look at that, see how it's going to split down the middle. Because you're going to want to do it in separate pours, basically regardless of what it is that you're copying. So you're going to want to coat it with something as well, and I'll go through that, and then we're going to basically just kind of walk through the process of setting everything up. So first of all, you want to do your mold, your form itself to do the mold. So you want to make sure that you have anywhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch on all 6 sides, top, bottom, left, right, up, down. And that's still pretty comfortable. You could go smaller if you really wanted to, depending on how thick and how durable the silicone is that you're going to use. So this stuff that I have is floppy, which is kind of what I wanted. That's what I've wanted for most of my applications, and it's fairly fire retardant, so it can take a lot of heat as well. So, but once you get your mold set up, let's say you go through this process, you get the size of it all set up, and I'm kind of using this as an example. So these are my step drill bits I wanted to make a copy of, and I was actually going to just keep the mold as the casing for it. And I'm taking these and I'm trying to sustain them so that they're sitting up. So the very first thing that you want to do once you get the box set up, so obviously you took the hot glue gun, you hot glue gun all of these sides, just fit them all together. It really doesn't matter whether it's like acrylic like this or these ones. I use just like a strong piece of cardboard. It's not perfectly square, it's not pretty, doesn't really make a big difference in the end, honestly. It's pretty slapped together. It's gonna work as long as it's not going to leak out. It doesn't matter. So and hot glue gun does really good to be able to keep everything together temporarily, and then when you want to pull it apart, it comes apart fairly easily as well. So for that reason, just about everybody that I've seen so far has used a hot glue gun to set up their little boxes or containers to be able to pour in. So once you get that set up, you're going to go and you do this two ways. Most people, they say to set a bedding of clay, like modeling clay. I don't have clay on hand and I didn't want to buy it specifically just for that. Play-Doh might work, haven't tried it, but usually they'll basically smash the item they're going to copy into the clay, and then you're going to pour on top of that. But since I don't have the clay, I'm going to basically either pour 1/4 of an inch in the bottom and let it set, which the set time is going to depend on the product. And then once it sets, then I would put it in, right? So that you've already got a base, because if you pour it and then immediately set it in, you're gonna have stuff down here on the bottom that's basically so thin that it'll be able to leak out. So you just want to give yourself a good base there. Something that I do when I have extra leftover is I'll just pour flat pieces like this. When I have one of those, I just throw it in the bottom to sit underneath these, and that's what I've done in this case. So that's another thing you can do. And then when I put these in, you know, it's already got that little base so that there's not going to be any holes in the bottom, right? So once I've got this in the bottom, I've got that bottom piece in, then I'm going to put my pieces in. Depending on what it is, you are going to want to grease it up or use some type of mold release. So you could use anything from an Elmer's glue mix. I've seen people use like mineral oil, and I've tried a bunch of different options that way, and there is professional stuff on the market that you can buy, but I worry about food safety with that stuff specifically. So what I was able to find out, which I actually like the very best, was this, which you'll see in the other video too. It's just Crisco. I mean, I just bought this little container because I don't actually have any. I don't usually use this type of stuff. So I used Crisco and I melted it with a lighter. So with a lighter, I just made a little puddle here in the middle, and I use this little sponge that I just keep in here to wipe everything down so it's all greased up basically. But while it's hardening, I go through and I wipe everything down to make sure that there's no big clumps that are going to sit in there, you know, so that you can still get good definition in that piece. And the Crisco obviously makes it food safe, and it releases really, really well. So once you have those mold released, I guess if you want to call it that, or if you have the Crisco in there, get them all slicked up, put them into place, and then at that point you're going to pour another batch of the silicone, and you're going to fill it up halfway, right? So you fill it up halfway in the container, and that is because you're going to want to have at least 2 separate parts depending on what your mold is specifically. So once you get your mold up to that point, you pour that second part. And one little tip or trick that I would definitely suggest, just to make sure that everything lines up, is have something like this. It's just a little bolt, right, or a nut, I mean, and I've got this tape on each side so that it won't sink all the way down, and also at the same time it will keep it from copying the center. So it's basically just going to put this little shape in there so that it'll be sitting there in the silicone. So as it sits in the silicone, it'll give you a spot. You don't want to have it obviously so close to these. I'd probably put this one right here and maybe one right over here. So, but I would orient it a little bit different on each side, so that you have an indent on each side that's a little bit different, so that if you put it the wrong way, there's no way that it will click together. So I usually do something like that. And in this example, I had these pieces that kind of worked like a key, kind of a similar idea. And as these were sitting here basically in this mold as it was curing, they were a little bit wonky and kind of went all over. That was something else, that was another tip that I saw, that people put just scraps of other molds that they didn't need anymore in there. You can use almost anything really to kind of fill up space to save material. But when it gets to be too much, it really does get choppy. So that's one of the takeaways that I actually learned from this specific mold. It got really choppy with some of these. So I am a little bit more careful now about how I cut these pieces up and how I'm going to layer them in there, and I would probably do it a little bit different next time, but that is an idea. It's nice though to have a key of some kind to be able to make sure that everything locks together well, and you can always pull it apart, put it back together, and you can actually feel the click as it pulls together. So that's why I have this, and I was going to use that for these. So once you have that and you pour halfway, right? Again, this is actually not a great example because of the way that it turned out. It ended up not coming together super well and not pulling apart very well because of all these clumps. So the other thing I would definitely suggest, so once it's hardened and you have half of this filled, at that point you take this Crisco again and you go over the entire surface of all of the silicone that just hardened, right? So that you have a very flat, nice plane with the exception of these keys, and it's nice and slick so that the silicone will not bond to itself. I did do that in the video, and you can see some of it pulls apart, but it missed some spots because I didn't do a great job on that. And so some of it doesn't want to pull apart. And so I had to take a knife and cut through and open it up, right? And that ends up being kind of iffy. You could cut up, you know, the item that you're trying to copy, and it ends up being a little bit of a pain that way. But if you do a good job making sure you get all the little corners and everything, then there's no spots that are going to be sticking together, and then you can go ahead and pour the very last layer. And that last layer is going to sit on top. It's not going to bond to anything at all because it's already sitting here like this. And then when you pull it out, you're going to be able to just literally just take it and pull it apart, and it just comes apart just like that. It is really easy. So, but when you're doing this and you put it together, you want to keep in mind where exactly you're going to be pouring the copies from. You need to plan for that hole. I was going to do it here on this side, but one of these chunks, which I couldn't even figure out which one, should have gone here. This one, it didn't turn out very well on this side, but basically I was going to be pouring it from this side. And all I would have to do really to keep this together, because it does actually click together pretty well, is literally just take a couple of rubber bands and wrap it around it, and it'll hold it together perfectly fine. And again, I would probably go over this with Crisco again before pouring it, obviously, so just to make sure that everything comes apart easily. And then when you pour it in, as you're pouring it, just do a little thin line at a time, and that helps eliminate bubbles. Okay. So, and then once everything sets up, you give it the proper amount of time, you should be able to just pull everything right back open again, and it should theoretically pull apart very easily. So a couple of the tips and tricks aside from like the Crisco kind of stuff that I've used that I was basically wanting to mention that makes things a little bit easier are these. So one of the things that can ruin a project is the bubbles that can be created in the silicone as you're mixing it. So there's a lot of different ways of avoiding that. Like, they call it degassing. A lot of times if you do have access to like a vacuum chamber of some kind, even if it's just like a small one, and you can pull out the air, it'll pull all the bubbles out of it. A lot of people don't have access to something like that, so if your dad doesn't or somebody you know doesn't, it should be fine. I'm not sure exactly the product that you're going to be working with. I haven't used it myself yet, but it should be pretty good, just because this brand does really good about having very few bubbles, and it's a little bit slower curing, so it lets all the bubbles rise out. Part of what I did to minimize the bubbles is I took these little syringes, right? Syringe or like a little cup just from like baby Advil or Tylenol, right? And I took them, and I took like a little medicine bottle basically, and I would take 5 or 10 milliliters at a time and fill it up, and then mark the line where it's at, and then fill up 10 more, and then mark the line where it's at, and then fill up 10 more and mark the line where it's at. And so I've got a cylinder here that I know has 90 milliliters, and I've marked them part A and part B, so that I know part A is going to go in this one, part B is going to go in this one. I can measure them out perfectly, and I know that I always pour A into B, and as long as I do it in that order, it eliminates a lot of confusion. So as you're doing that and as you're mixing, you don't want to whip too much, because if you whip quickly, you're going to introduce air into it. But you're still going to have some air in it no matter what you do. So to eliminate that, I basically just took like a little can. This is like a chunked chicken can basically. And I let these sit. Once I pour part A and part B into their containers, I stick them in here and I let them sit in hot water. And you let them sit in this really, really hot water, and they get really, really thin, almost water thin. And once they get water thin, then you pour them together and there's going to be a whole lot fewer bubbles, right? So, and with those fewer bubbles, you shouldn't have much of a problem creating a mold that is pretty smooth and it's got a shiny surface, and that's usually a really good surface as long as you've got that. Some of these molds that I've created, I did have bubbles in them, and when I poured them again, the Crisco does really well also for filling some of those gaps so that the holes do not get copied. So again, the Crisco kind of solved a lot of problems, and I've never seen anybody else use it, but it kind of made sense. So I liked it. I'd suggest it, especially if it's something you want to keep food safe. Then, so these are going to be the things that you're going to want to use. So tools, basically, there's not a whole lot. The hot glue gun is your biggest tool, right? That's going to be your big tool. And then you've got a knife, possibly. The sharper it is, the better, just because it makes it really easy to cut through without having everything squished together or whatever. And other than that, it's just kind of making everything. There's not a whole lot of tools involved unless you want to set up something like this. It makes it pretty easy to measure things out. And one little side note, this is kind of fun. So usually I have a little bit of leftover in this one afterwards, right? So, and I'll mix it up with just like a popsicle stick. And as I'm mixing it up and everything, I let the popsicle stick just kind of set in here afterwards. And Chris likes to come by after everything's hardened up, and you pick it out. It's really fun to clean up, just because you're pulling all this stuff off. It's one of those things that's, I don't know, it's like sensory. I like that. That's a fun little side note. It's something that can be very, very useful. It's something that can be, I don't know, you can do a lot of really cool stuff with it. There's a lot of different products on the market. I've used this stuff specifically to be able to cast molds. of this same exact silicone, which I have one here. So this was the very first one that I just kind of poured with the extra stuff that I had on hand. And it's a little bit stretchy. It'll only go so far, but it's kind of nice to be able to have this ability to be able to reproduce things. I took this also of one of the little Lego flat pieces of Chris's, and we actually made a completely transparent piece that was only half of this is what it ended up being, and that makes for some fun stuff, and they like to play with this piece a lot itself. We also use this for like his science videos. This is a dory that we made. We were talking about fossils basically and how a fossil is made, and so we made a little dory fossil and we talked about different types of fossils and used that as an example. This is another one that I made. I told you about the Subaru symbol stuff that I was thinking about, and this is my little Subaru symbol, or their emblem I should say. This is my mold that I made. This one was just like a little piece of extra scrap melamine that was there. So, and this is my original Subaru emblem that I just basically cleaned out as best as I could. And here's my little key. So, and I just cut that chunk out actually with a knife. I didn't use anything specifically, I just cut it out after I made the mold. And then I cast this with epoxy, and it's turned out pretty cool. Not bad at all. I mean, it's definitely a lot cooler than the one that was originally there. And there's a lot of little flaws in it. If you can pour this type of silicone stuff, you can pour epoxy, you can pour and cast like plastics and things like that that are a little bit closer to like Lego plastics. There's all kinds of stuff on the market, just depends on the product that you use. So you can do a lot of really cool stuff, and it can come in handy quite a bit. I've definitely had fun playing with this. But for your specific, for the Chewies specifically, I would use, this is what I have, was Smooth Sill 940. So let me write this down. I got Chris and Ronan here. We're hanging out. I can write it on this actually. So this is Smooth Sill 940. So, and this could be 940, 950, 960. As long as it's Smooth Sill 940, 50, or 60, you should be fine. Those are all food grade, more durable, considered rubber, kind of like spatula type rubbers. And that's what I was finding basically for something that's going to be food safe and that's going to have this type of like a chewy, sensory kind of a feel to it. And so I'm hoping that's going to work really well. I haven't tried it myself yet. There's a lot of products on the market. This specific brand is called Smooth On, and that's basically the brand itself. It's very reputable. Also, you have, if you want to try this one specifically for other stuff or whatever, if you want to try it for this one is the Mold Star 30. It's by the same company, Smooth On. So this is the stuff that I used. I just ran out. Basically they're on their last little bit. It's not going to be enough to finish anything. So I think that's it. I've done just about everything I can remember. I might have more stuff. I'm pretty sure if it pops into my head, I can text it to you or something. But hopefully this helps. I know it'll save a lot of money. It's about $50, I think, for the product. The Smooth Seal 940. It's about 50 bucks, but it'll make quite a few of these chewies. And obviously the mold too. And you can use it for a whole lot of other stuff. It'll definitely come in handy, and I'm pretty sure it'll end up being way more cost effective than buying a whole bunch of them as they are. And one other idea that I had as I was putting this together and that I wanted to try, I wasn't able to do, is I honestly kind of wonder if you could put like just a drop of like mint extract or something like that in it so that it doesn't have a rubbery taste, because I know that would bother me. So if I could, I don't know, I would honestly try something like that, like a mint extract or something, just to see if everything still comes together. To my understanding, the silicone should still be able to cure perfectly fine, as long as there's nothing in it with phosphorus. I'm pretty sure there's no phosphorus in mint extract, so I think that should actually work. Might be worth a try. Hopefully this stuff helped. Definitely if you have any questions or get stuck anywhere, let me know. I'm more than happy to help. Hopefully this will be a good fit for you and give Eddie something new and fun possibly. So enjoy. Have a good one.